And welcome back.
This is Module 7. It's our final session today. We have had 2 courses that we've been talking about. No, 2 exams. I say course, but I mean these are the courses. They are the exam. Yesterday we were talking about the essentials of building a store app with C#. That is exam 70484, and today was 70485. The advanced topics around store development in C# and using XAML. We've talked about a lot of things today, especially some of the platform features and the contracts that you can leverage inside your Windows application. And we just talked about Play 2 and Print, both just really thick conversations to have.
Yep.
And so now we're going to lighten the load here with
Exactly.
2 more extremely heavy, honestly,
Yep.
extremely heavy topics. The first one is the leveraging of well, this one's not too bad. The Windows Live SDK, and then you'll talk about still the Windows Live SDK, actually.
Yeah, but a certain facet of it associated with SkyDrive.
I'll talk about getting your Microsoft account. Earlier, we talked about the Facebook account and getting your profile picture, your name, and email. I'll show how to do that with the Microsoft account, which is a pretty reliable account if they're using Windows 8. And as you pointed out, if you're using your app, you probably got it from the store. If you're using the store, you have to have a Microsoft account.
Exactly.
So you can pretty much rely on the fact they will at least have one. So that's a great way to do it. So let me just jump right into that. Let's do some official slides.
Yes.
All right. This is advanced platform features for Windows 8 development. Let's talk about Windows Live. You know, it's tricky talking about Windows Live, to be honest, because we don't even use that word anymore. In theory.
Yeah.
Now, instead of calling it your Windows Live ID, we call it your Microsoft account. Instead of calling it Windows Live Mail, we call it Outlook.com. There's probably something else, but I can't think of what it is, right? SkyDrive is just SkyDrive now. Let's hope we stick to SkyDrive.
Yeah.
And we don't lose that name. When we lost Metro, I was heartbroken, to be honest. Not that that matters, but there it is. Okay, so much like before, I'm going to right-click the references inside my project and say Manage NuGet Packages. I'm going to say, let's look up the Live SDK. It'll search online for me to find the Live SDK. Here it is right here. I already have it installed, but once you have it, you have it. And the only thing you really need to do is, if you use Live Services, you go into your account, the application in dev.windows.com, and you can set it up for all the advanced services. If you're just using your Microsoft account, you don't have to do that. You can only use an app that is associated to the store. That's the only trick. So go ahead and right-click your application, say Store, and then say Associate App with Store. It's free to create an app in the store. It's just not free to publish an app into the store. All right, great. So this is a very simple little demo just to show that you can do it. And is there one more slide? It's a very simple demo, but let's go through the slides for a second.
Yeah, seems like a good plan.
The Live SDK, which is free to use, is an implementation of OAuth version 2 that is used when you log into Windows 8, although it is possible to log in as a domain account.
Or as a local account.
Or even a local account, which is eventually deprecated. I assume everybody knows that. And it simplifies login because it can be single log. In fact, we'll see in just a second that it'll be a single sign-in for me. So I've already logged into Windows 8, and it'll pass right through. This might actually be not better, just different than Facebook login. You know, gives me, as soon as I have that and I've authenticated, it gives me the opportunity then to reach out to SkyDrive. It gives me the opportunity to reach out to my calendar and do other things like that and talk to my different properties that are in the old Windows Live suite.
Yeah, and effectively, you know, the whole sort of Live SDK that's sitting out there in terms of endpoints sitting out in the cloud are implemented as JSON and REST-based services. So what the SDK provides us is kind of a shim or a veneer that sits on top of those and allows us to interact those more directly as C# developers rather than doing a bunch of service calls. But the thickness of that shim varies over the various API set. Some aspects of it are very, very simple.
Yep.
And
they're
some
all
of them,
simple. No, they're all simple. just get ready. There's going to be some work.
Yeah.
And you'll appreciate the fact that we have these demos for you. It's
Indeed.
kind of the short of it all. All right, so first let's talk about the Microsoft account. This is for authentication purposes. Much like we were talking about in the Facebook demo, you could use it so you could offload the effort and risk of authentication to another service, such as the Microsoft Authentication Service for Microsoft Account. From that point forward, you can get a reference to the account and use that to store things like personalization, some sort of advanced information that's specific settings, things like that. When we're asking for that single sign-in account reference, we pass in a scope of how much information we really want. Like we were talking about that before with Facebook. You could post on behalf of them, see their friends, things like that. There's a whole different suite of scopes inside the Microsoft account. I can get basic information. I could get your picture. I could get your email address. I could get your photos and move on from there. Now, there are lots of things. For example, I can't get your email. Right? There's another process for that that's a little bit more sophisticated. So this is the basic SDK to get these pieces. Inside this suite now is Skype, but that's also a separate SDK to talk to. This isn't one for everything. There was an 8.0 SDK. This is the Rev. Not too. I don't know. I haven't seen any changes at all, as a matter of fact. So one interesting thing is that on these guidelines, they say you want to be able to leverage it for single sign-on, of course, but you also want to enable sign-out.
Yes.
And I think
which seems to be more challenging than perhaps it should be.
You cannot. The user has signed in into Windows 8. They come into your application. You're not going to sign the user out. They're already signed in. So you can sign in again to get permission to your app, yet we are yet to figure out how to sign out.
Yeah.
Change the scopes all that you want. We are yet to figure that out.
Exactly. And I think kind of the challenge that you have is you're leveraging a single sign-on environment. You've signed on. If you've signed on with your live credentials in your Windows environment, why would you want to sign out of Live?
Yeah.
You don't want to sign out of Live.
You do not. And you can't reject your own credentials.
Yes.
I think that's what users are really wanting to do. You know, they want the user to have to re-provision the right for them to access their account again. And once it's there, that provisioning is finished and the permission is already granted. It's up to the user then to go to their account and remove it or edit it.
Yep.
Good enough?
Good enough.
All right. Let's show what we're talking about here. Again, this is the XAML. There's nothing to it. There's an image and a text block. The image will show I'll log in here as myself. It'll show my personal live photo, or it's my Microsoft account photo.
Yep.
And it will also show my name. Easy enough. So if I were to hit my start menu, you can see my photo is over at the right, and also my name as well. This will leverage the exact same thing. So how do we do that? Well, we ask the application to asynchronously log in using the async login method. Let's go to the code behind so you can see it. So on navigated to, we're doing that because we want to leverage it in as an asynchronous operation. We could have done this in loaded as well. No reason not to. And we'll just show the abstraction, and then we'll go into the abstraction. So you'll have to build your own abstraction. This is not something you just run and go with. You'll either build an abstraction around it, or you'll just have some seriously complex code.
Yes.
So here's the operation right here. The result of this is the one line that gets it all done. Login async. It's a method that's just below this in the code. Login async. You pass in whether or not you're going to attempt to log out. If the user is using a local account, you do get that luxury of being able to log out. If the user is not using a local account, you do not. And then the result will determine whether or not that login was successful. If it does not have a value, that should not happen. If it does not have a value, then that's an error situation. You just handle it, whatever it is. You need to, of course, write some level of defensive coding so that you can handle bad situations. Not everybody's going to give your application permission. In this case, we're going to do it very, very easily. If there is a value and it's easy and it has enough, so first, whether or not it has a value, by the way, it's a Boolean that's coming back. If it doesn't have a value, so that it's null, that means it wasn't set. If it does have a value, that means it's true. Just dot value is for in a Boolean sense. In this case,
so it's a nullable Boolean.
It's a nullable Boolean, so a 3-state Boolean.
Yep.
And thanks.
It's an oxymoron.
3-state, 2-state object. All right. And so again, sort of naive, as you would say, setting the data context of the page to a new anonymous type with two quick properties of name and photo. They'll already have been captured and put into a static property for me called user. Easy enough. If it comes back as false, that means it's not an error, but what it does mean is that they told me no. And so now the login has failed for one reason or another. They've clicked the back arrow or they've said no. That's a possibility
explicitly
as well.
blocked you.
Yeah. So again, this is my defensive programming. Not super robust here, but it gets the job done so that you can have at least a placeholder. So here's my login method itself. And you'll have to do this too, by the way, in just a moment when you show off the intricacies of using SkyDrive. And that is to create the live auth client. This is a wrapper for OAuth, specific for the implementation of live. Now, we could also log in for using WAMs, but this is the way that we can use the SDK to talk directly to SkyDrive. So this is a compound or a bit we can build on each other as we show these demos. So I'll create the client, and in this case, I'm going to say it's for the light theme. The only reason you would change the theme is so it matches as good as possible, as well as possible inside your application. Here's where I process whether or not I'm going to log out. It may not even log out at all, and so in order not to have an error, I'll test first to see if can log out, which is supplied to me by the client. So we talked about the different scopes, and I've added every scope I could think of here, as many as possible. The basic information, emails of all of my personal emails is what that means. Access to my SkyDrive, access to my photos on SkyDrive, access to, I just duplicated emails, and access to my calendar events as well. There's really no reason to have emails on there twice. It wouldn't cause an error, just no reason to have it. Then this is the operation to do the login, and the login is where I pass in the scope. This will create a UI that I can't control. It'll pop up to the user using the web authentication broker, ask them to log in, providing their own credentials. I don't have access to their username. I don't have access to their password. And then all I get back is a success result. And if it is successful, I can use that status right here to see whether or not they're connected. If it is, fantastic, I go from there. And from there, then, I can go and get the session and pull down what's referred to as me. This is just the moniker used to identify the personal information for the user's account. I can go get all the me information. Then I can go and fetch me/picture. That's how I get the photo of it. And then I just set up a wrapper called Live ID that we've created here below. It handles all the rest of parsing it out. You have to use a lot of dynamics, Darren, because this is just a messy freaking object that comes back.
It is. I mean, in effect, it's not strongly typed, and it's one of the challenges, and to a certain extent, I guess, the disappointments with leveraging this SDK is it is a very lightweight shim that sits on top of these services, and because these services can return different shapes of JSON data, rather than using something like JSON.NET and strongly typed backing classes and serializing those out, instead we return dynamic objects.
Right. That's the reason I said your implementation is going to be similar to mine. I mean, it's some sort of wrapper to make some sense of this so you're not constantly checking is null, is present, and all these other pieces. So this is the Live ID class itself that represents the user. So here's the constructor where I can pass in that result without an image. Here's the constructor where I can pass in the result with an image. And so from there I can go in and start parsing it out. If result contains key I, because it's a dictionary object, and I can go in and parse each of those, whether or not it exists, cast it to the right type, set it to a strongly typed property so I can use it very easily. And of course, this is where you want to abstract it and write it just one time. Parse out the URI, doing a try create, so I don't have to have a try catch here. Do the same thing with the date time property of when it was last updated, which is pretty handy. If I was very sophisticated, I could look at the update time and make sure that I don't get new data too frequently, so I don't waste network bandwidth and just the effort. I can also get all the emails. Again, look to see if they're there, cast them, and go on from there. Then a little bit of logic to go sniff out the image to make sure I have the image for this user as well. And then, when all that is done, nothing. Right? These are just the whole placeholders for it right here. And now I'm done. This is the end. So there's two things that we showed just now, and I'll just collapse it all so it looks a little less intimidating, is a custom login method, and then this live ID class that's right here. And so it kind of gets the job done really nicely. And these are just little helper references that I might use later, so I kept a reference to it. And of course, this is the user, the resulting user that I have. If I were to run this right now, you can see what the UI looks like. I'll go ahead and debug it. It'll immediately call the login because I put it in on navigated to. It has a quick error, an error in advertise, and an error in registration. Let's try one more time.
Maybe because you got the references for the old advertise, you might want to just remove those references.
Well, crazy enough, it works second time. Sometimes, just nice.
Yeah.
Just
It
try
could be
one
on
more
another
time.
project. May not be the one that you're actually running.
It was actually advertised causing it somehow. Anyway, none of that matters now.
Yep.
Here we are this is the web authentication broker prompting me to make sure that I want to give this sort of permission to the application that's running here. So I'll show you. This is the Windows 8.1 Jumpstart. How did it know my name? It knew it because this is this has a reference now up into the store. That's how it pulled out what my name is. So it's saying Windows 8.1 Jumpstart. Needs your permission to, and here's the list of all the scopes that I provided. Of course, it's sort of outlandish. I'm asking for everything, just so I can get the picture. You can see sign in automatically, which comes with every single scope, which is nice. They do this once every time they run your application. They'll never have to see this again and just kind of roll with it. That's nice. Access my name, gender, display picture, contacts, and friends. Access email address, SkyDrive, photos, calendars, kind of matches the scopes that we were talking about before. The user then has yes or no. If I say no, it returns back that false. If there's some sort of error, it returns a null. I'm going to say yes. And as soon as I say yes, then the logic behind the scenes goes and fetches. I'll show you right here. Wait a minute. Wait a minute, Darren. Wait just a second. That did not happen in rehearsal. That did not happen in rehearsal. Oh, brave baby. Today has been the day, hasn't it?
It has been the day.
I don't understand.
It has been the day.
All right. So this pulls in my profile picture. My profile picture is the cartoon Spock. It has brought in my name as well. I could also start iterating now through my email.
I can tell you really designed that name because it stands out.
I don't like to just, throw my name gigantic out there for people.
Phone number, yes.
Yeah. And anyway, so it pulls it in. This is sort of nice. You can greet the person, hello, Jerry, things like that, just like we did in the Facebook.
Or in this case, hello, Jerry.
Jerry. It whispers, right? Exactly. I don't want the app to yell at me. All right. Beautiful. Not quite sure what caused that. Maybe, I have no idea. I don't even know why it didn't deploy the first time either. So maybe there's this little bit of gremlin going on. Nonetheless, it did finally work. Pull down my picture, pull down my name. That's what you want to do as well. Put a nice little wrapper. By the way, it would have failed gracefully. I did a manual break right here. Without a breakpoint, I can still call system.diagnostics.debugger.break and cause the application to break as long as it's debugging, even though there's no breakpoint here. It's pretty handy if there's a special scenario where this is an outlier, and I always want to know if there is an exception. So it's quite nice. It wouldn't impact. That would never have happened in production because it wouldn't have been attached to the debugger. So that's the Microsoft account using the Live SDK. Now, using the Live SDK, I can also reach into the user's SkyDrive, which we talked about in the strategies yesterday, is a pretty handy way to take data that they have, put it up into the cloud, and store it so it can be cross devices, cross applications, stored in a special place so that it's not local and they trash their machine. You can still do that. There is, of course, a little bit of risk. The user could delete it or tamper with it.
Yep.
But it's pretty cool to be able to go into a user's SkyDrive.
Absolutely. Okay, so show my slides. So we'll start off, as you mentioned, the SkyDrive. This allows people to synchronize. So an overview of SkyDrive, you kind of gave a top-level view there, but it's Microsoft's cloud storage solution, files, photos, app sharing. Initially, when Windows 8 came out, there was a lot of guidance around saying, hey, you know what? Don't store application data up there for precisely the reasons you mentioned. But it became very clear that it is kind of a ubiquitous service that's available, and it makes a lot of sense for people who don't necessarily want to commission any other form of service I set up a web service for your application or whatever, it becomes a very sort of common place to start saving information. So then the guidelines are around, well, let's kind of establish some sort of convention for a schema to upload those things. Anyway, typical guidelines for using SkyDrive: do so in response to user actions. You're allowed to store data without user interaction, but kind of let the user know that this is happening.
We're writing to your SkyDrive.
Yeah, we're we're using space that they're basically paying for in many instances. So give them the option. Use SkyDrive for what it does best. If you're storing documents, if you're storing images, and so on and so forth, do that. That's a very native method. If, however, you have to store particular application data, then by all means feel free to do so.
Yeah.
You're allowed to. Don't undermine trust. And really what that's getting to is don't throw a huge amount of data out there that's going to fill up their SkyDrive. That's going to be really disappointing. It's going to invite uninstalls. It's going to invite one-star reviews and so on, and you don't want to have that in your application.
And let me put my black hat on for a second.
Yep.
You're logging in as the user to their SkyDrive. They don't have a limit, or they don't have a limitation or any kind of security boundary to their own SkyDrive. As a result, you don't either. And so this is where don't undermine trust. Don't start ruining things that they might have. They have an application, they have another document out there, and you go and tinker with it so that it can't be opened, something like that, right?
Yeah,
I hate to put that in people's mind, but that's another piece as well.
It's a surefire way to get this thing blocked.
Yep.
Absolutely it is. Where to store data in SkyDrive? So again,
this is that schema you were talking about.
Exactly. You don't want to just throw it around everywhere. It becomes confusing for the user. Try and follow this pattern. Assume that there's going to be a subfolder called application data. If you don't find it, create it. Use some convention for naming the subfolder, such as application name followed by your publisher name or your company name. Then within that folder, place your file. So as an example, we'll use Jerry's SkyDrive. Check for the existence of application data or create it if it doesn't exist. Windows 8 Jumpstart, and then the publisher is DPE USW.
Got it.
Okay, nice, simple, straightforward convention.
And because it's so orderly, it's less likely that a user would go in and just nuke it because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, they'll see application data. Oh, what's that? They'll open that up and they'll see a list of applications that they've perhaps installed over their time. That tells them what it is.
Right.
Okay. SkyDrive API core concepts. Again, this is part of the Live API, which is hosted out as a series of HTTP servers, which are running or REST-based services that are providing JSON results.
Okay.
In common with all REST-based services, we're interacting with those using HTTP verbs such as post to put to upload, get to download. We can use the move and copy verbs to move things around without downloading, which is key. If you think about something stored out there, we can turn around and say move document A that's located in this directory structure to document B located in this directory structure without having to download it via our app and then push it back up. Saves bandwidth. Let's be some of these devices could be on a roaming protocol, using wireless data, cell phone plans, and so on and so forth. So be respectful.
That's right.
The SDK provides relatively low-level wrappers around these operations. Live Connect client.postAsync, Live client.getAsync, and so on. So it's not as if we've really got detailed APIs that represent interacting with photos.
Doesn't make it all that easy.
Indeed not. We also need permissions, but once we have a permission from a parent object, it gets cascaded all the way up a hierarchy. Once we have it, we can use it in any child area.
Okay.
When we're interacting with elements out in SkyDrive, they all share a number of core properties. So a folder and a file, from many respects, is just actually a piece of data.
Yeah.
We're interacting with data via APIs. We're not really directly interacting with folders and documents and so on and so forth that are sitting out there. So there's this abstraction that basically says, they inherit from the same basic underlying data structure. They all have an ID. Now, you can tell the difference on the ID if it's a file or a folder just because it's prefixed with file dot or folder dot.
That's right. Makes it kind of easy.
Yep. And as you can see, the rest of the identifier just rolls off the tongue and it's easy to share with everybody. Hey, Jerry, do you want my file, A6B2, blah, blah, blah. But fortunately, we also get an opportunity to supply a user name that's usually used for display. such as episode nodes.txt. We have a description that we can supply. Then we have types. So we kind of mentioned file and folder, but we also have specialized folder types such as album for containing pictures and so on and so forth.
Now, can a picture be in both a folder and an album? I think it can.
I believe it can. I mean, there's a kind of a logical structure around that and a physical structure around that. In reality, we are not exposed to the physical structure of storage on SkyDrive. We are only ever provided the representation in terms of logical, which to a certain extent, again, makes it more complex to interact with this because we have a tendency to assume that we can navigate through these things in a hierarchical manner.
Right.
And there really is no hierarchy because...
every object inside your SkyDrive really is just a gigantic flat list.
Exactly. And the hierarchy is implied by association and by data, not necessarily by position. And that also makes a huge amount of sense if we start thinking about it. SkyDrive is built on top of Azure, which is built on top of a whole bunch of blob storage. This blob storage is just objects with metadata. And so that's really what we're traversing through. And there's some APIs that give us this information in a somewhat representative manner of hierarchy, but the reality is that's implied, not actually in storage. This makes it very scalable, makes it very performant, but doesn't necessarily make it very easy to interact with.
From an API point of view.
From an API perspective, absolutely. So working with SkyDrive, we have a number of important types that we need to interact with. Live Connect Session, which you touched on as part of your capability, but this actually represents an active connection out to the live APIs.
And a session can expire.
Can expire, and you need to log on in order to receive it. Got it. Live Connect Client, this is how we interact with the APIs that are exposed out by the Live Connect SDK. We require a valid session. We also require a scope. WL SkyDrive gives us read access, WL SkyDrive _update, read and write access. That is on top of WL _sign in and so on and so forth to actually provide the ability to log in.
Yeah.
The Connect client and those APIs we call all return live operation result. As you mentioned in your session earlier on, this is a dynamic dictionary that contains key value pairs. We can interact with them via the dynamic keyword, but there is no IntelliSense, there's no validation and verification.
There's no typing either.
Exactly. We just get what we get. And if we ask for something that doesn't exist, we get nothing back.
Right.
So how do we start interacting with these things? Well, we need to supply an item ID as either the ID of one of the very few friendly names that are actually created for us. An example would be of an ID is file dot, that rolls off the tongue, or /me/SkyDrive. You look at that and you go, great, hierarchy. Can I do /me/SkyDrive/file dot? No, you can't. Unfortunately, no. So in order to do this, we need to log in. So if our session is null, then we check for a login. And we need to keep doing that because our session can expire. To log in is actually relatively straightforward, as you demonstrated. We create a new live client session. This is actually not a login. This is actually leveraging the session for interacting with it. But live client.getAsync. So this is going to call our a get method. So it's a get verb on the operation. We're supplying the item ID that we wish to interact with, and we get back the operation result. So this, for example, if we'd supplied me/SkyDrive as the item ID, would bring us back an operational result that gives us information relating to me/SkyDrive.
Which is a folder.
Which is a folder in this scenario, yes. It's the root of your SkyDrive in reality. Result properties can be accessed via dynamic. You often see people interact with them via the key value pairs as a dictionary, but this also works. Just accept that if you type result dot, you do not get ID or name or anything along those lines. You have to type those. So you need to know what you're looking for.
This won't give you a compile time error, but it is at risk of a runtime error if you've typed it wrong.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So now let's sort of understand folder and file hierarchy.
All right.
We think about things in terms of the folder and file hierarchy, but the reality is, as we say, it's actually not stored that way. So some folders are accessed by folder ID. We can see the ID is prefixed with a folder. Some folders are accessed by name. So we have some special ones that allow us to go to SkyDrive, calendars, contact, and events.
Okay.
We must list files by first obtaining the containing folder ID. So say, for example, we want to get everything that's in the root of our SkyDrive. We've got to get that folder ID back. We then leverage that in this particular manner. So imagine we want to download a file that's sitting in our SkyDrive, and this is the hierarchy as we imagine it.
Virtual hierarchy, yes.
Yeah. So we're in /me/SkyDrive, that's the root of my SkyDrive. We have a directory 1. Within that, we have directory 2.
Okay.
Within there, we have filename.txt.
Makes sense.
In order to retrieve that, we first need to get the ID for directory 1. In order to get the ID for directory 1, we actually need to get a list of folders that is in /me/SkyDrive.
Ah, okay.
Okay? So, in order to do that, we have to get the list of files and folders from /me/SkyDrive. So the way that we do this is we get the results of /me/SkyDrive, and we search for a name that matches directory 1.
I love it.
Simple, easy, just rolls off the tongue.
It's crazy so far.
So now we have the string ID of directory 1, which is that easy, simple mnemonic at the bottom there.
Mnemonic.
Everybody remember it, because when I move on, I'm going to ask you what it was.
We're going to need this later. Well, we really are, actually.
Absolutely, which is fortunately why we have variable and state with encoding.
In PowerPoint.
So now as we move into step 3, we're now going to ask for the folders that are contained within directory 1, because if you recall, our path is SkyDrive /directory1/directory 2, and then I want my file. So this is how we go about doing this. So we invoke liveclient.getAsync, and now we're saying /folder, which is the little handy mnemonic.
Oh, nice. So it does at least some kind of filtering.
Yes. But we also notice we're not referencing /me/SkyDrive at all. So there is no hierarchy on this get. We're now using the ID and turning around and saying, get me everything. And because we're using a REST-based API, I can append query parameters to there. So as you can see, I can specify /files. Here's the annoyance. We say /files, but that also means /files and folders.
Does it really?
It does, which is why I can now do the filter on there and say, actually, just give me the folders.
Can you also say filter equal files?
I can. Okay. So this operation result now contains a dynamic dictionary of folders that are present inside directory 1. Now I need to get the files that are in directory 2. So if I remember, directory 1 contains directory 2. So we need to go and find directory 2, and we do that using that little link query where we iterate through the results and find the name of directory 2. Yep. Once we've found that, we get its ID. Then we leverage its ID, and we say, let's get a list of files and folders, as it happens, in directory 2. So this, again, is the very same format. So we're saying liveclient.getAsync, and then we're using the folder ID to go and pull that in. And again, there's no reference to
the... You could have said filter equals file there.
I actually think there isn't a filter for files.
Yeah.
I actually think that's right. There isn't a filter for files.
Yeah.
We can filter so it's just folders,
yeah,
or we get files and folders.
Okay, makes sense.
So in this scenario, now operation result contains a dictionary of all the files and folders that are contained within this particular ID, which is directory 2.
All right.
If you're going to be doing this navigation quite a lot, it makes sense for you to cache these IDs.
Yeah.
So you don't have to keep making these queries. Step 6, now we need to get hold of file name text. So we need to find the properties for that. And so we're going to iterate through the results and find the file name info that matches filename.txt. From there, we can get the download path for that file.
So far, we've only been messing around with metadata.
Yes. Now we're actually pulling the metadata out that will actually give us an HTTP URI that we can leverage to go and download that file. Okay?
Makes sense to me.
So that's our source file. Now we need to do something that seems totally and utterly bizarre.
Okay.
We actually need to pre-create a storage file on our local system, which will be the destination of the file we download.
Interesting.
Okay?
Yes.
So we create that because that's the only way. We can't actually have a physical path to our file system.
Yeah.
We're in a sandbox, or the pit of despair. And so what we actually have to do is pass a storage file. So in order to have a storage file for our file, we need to create one that represents our file when it's downloaded. So that's what we're doing here. Once we have that, we can then pass to the live client background download async
Okay.
the path, the web-based path of the file where we're going to download from, plus a storage file where the resultant download is going to be placed.
Okay, now I understand. So I have a storage file as a target because I will pass this off to a background download task.
Exactly.
Even if now, once you've activated this, now you can close your application and trust that the download will still occur.
Correct.
Got it.
It's been delegated out to the operating system, basically. We can choose to obviously await, and that will allow us to wait until this completes.
All right, makes sense to me. So you can still have a spinner and say, waiting.
Exactly. So to recap, the process for downloading a file. We first of all start iterating through our SkyDrive.
Yep.
We find the directory number 1 from the list. We use that to get the folders within directory number 1.
Okay.
Once we've got those folders, we find the next folder we want. And obviously we had the scenario where we had directory 1, which contained directory 2. If we need to go deeper than that, if we're going through a hierarchy of picture folders
Rinse
and so
and
on,
repeat. Just
rinse and repeat.
Keep on going.
Once we've done, we get to our final directory. We then need to request a list of files in that directory. We now need to match that against the file that we wish to download. Once we've done that, we can then get that file, find its download path from the metadata for that file.
Okay.
We then need to create a local target in our file system using storage file, and then we need to download to that target.
Got it.
So that is the process that we need to go through. We could go through a deep demo of that, and what we
I feel like we just did.
feel like we went through very, very detailed exactly the steps. What we've done to actually make this a lot easier is we've actually created a helper that encapsulates a lot of these behaviors, that simplifies it. So let's do a very quick walkthrough of that helper. That really just helps demonstrate some of the concepts. We've written it, so hopefully you don't have to write as much.
Right.
So what we have here is an application that leverages SkyDrive to store something that we need to pull in the cloud. We have a extended splash screen. During that extended splash screen, we actually have the ability to load data from SkyDrive, which is the perfect place to do this because we want this to complete before we progress into the rest of our application. I have a view model called Episode Notes.
Zoom just a drop.
Zoom just a drop. My mouse is getting tired.
Is it?
So we have a view model that exposes out a static getNotes method. Let's go and have a look at that definition. It's Zoom just a drop as well. So now what we have is the ability to get notes. Because we're using a web-based technology, we chose to serialize an object in JSON out there. We're not going to go into much more detail about that, but that's why we pre-configure a JSON result. We have a SkyDrive helper that has a method called getOrCreateApplicationDataFolder. Now you recall that when we were talking about how you're going to persist your application data out in SkyDrive is to use a convention. We've created a helper method that allows us to follow that established convention, and we'll actually check to see if it exists, return it if it does, otherwise create it for us and then return it.
How repetitive is that if you don't? I mean,
exactly. So we have that sitting out there. All we need to do is pass in our app name for the SkyDrive. Bang. Let's not worry about the implementation details of that. The next thing is the notes from SkyDrive file information. Again, using our SkyDrive helper, we have get file if exists. So now what we can do is turn around and pass in a file name that we're looking for, plus the ID of our app data folder.
it'll do that get query for you, look for that ID, and return a null, I assume?
A null if it doesn't exist, which is what we've got here. Notes if not equal null.
Okay.
If it does exist, then we have a value there. Again, we're really trying to make life easy to interact with this API. If we've got something, then basically what we do is we still have to create a temporary file for us to download. But now what we've also done is we've created this download file wrapper in our SkyDrive helper that allows us to just pass in the download path again and where we want it to save. We're awaiting that result. Once that's arrived, we then read that text into our JSON, and that's done all of those steps for us, but it's encapsulated that within the SkyDrive helper.
Okay.
The SkyDrive helper is a pretty complex block of helper methods and so on and so forth. Very, very quickly, you can see it's 284 lines, so there is a significant amount of stuff in there. It's not particularly valuable for us to walk through that at this point in time.
No, you're right.
And so...
I mean, it definitely speaks to the fact that the Live SDK is going to take a little bit of work in order for you to really leverage in your app. But if you want to talk to a user's SkyDrive to back up your data or anything like that, these are the steps you can't avoid. You will be going through this.
Yep.
You'll log in like I demonstrated with the Microsoft account, and then you'll iterate through the different types using the ID and then the truly unstructured type of data like you're showing here.
Yep.
You can use our helper, and it will help you quite a bit, I think. Or you can write your own if, for one reason or another, you prefer another approach.
Yep.
I can't imagine a different approach. It would just be different code doing the same thing.
Exactly. So, this will be available in the code that we put up there. We haven't made this fully robust.
Right.
But we do intend to continue working on this because this saves us a huge amount of time as we're building our applications, and we're happy to share it.
Yep, that's right. Okay, perfect. So in this module, we've been talking about the Live SDK almost exclusively using what the user is likely already logged in on their tablet or device. And so you can get their profile information. You can talk to other pieces of the portfolio, of the Live portfolio, including SkyDrive, as you showed us, going through the different API. Don't approach it lightly. It's going to take a little bit of work. Once you get it, it should be fine. Very performant, as you said, but probably not the hierarchical way of implementing it that you may have assumed.
Indeed.
Excellent. Excellent, Darren. Good job.
Thank you.
Darren, we've got a few more minutes, and then this is the end of Module 7. This is our last module. We've been here for 2 days. We talked about Essentials yesterday, Advanced today.
2 days, yet it feels like an eternity.
Does it? Let's take a couple of minutes, pull up the chat, and see if we have any direct questions we might be able to address and talk to. If you're a developer out there watching right now, here's your one and only chance. We'll probably have enough time for a couple of questions, do our best to answer them, architectural questions, technical questions. No reason to ask about the future of anything. Darren and I don't know. I mean, probably true.
Probably true.
I mean, odds of that being correct are really high. If you have a question, just preface it with question : It's the easiest way to find. As we wait here for just a second, I want to say that the most common question I get is not around how to do things in XAML, but if to do things in XAML. Developers come to me and say, I know that you have WinJS, I know you have HTML5, I also know you have XAML. How do I choose between the two? What do you tell somebody who comes?
I was actually looking at the questions.
Oh, well, let me tell you what I tell people, how to choose between HTML5 and XAML.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions coming.
The most core piece that you have to think about as a developer is what your development team is actually capable of. And so if your development team doesn't know XAML and doesn't know C#, then certainly it's going to be an uphill battle for them to be able to write a XAML C# app. However, if your developers just happen to be HTML developers but not really awesome at it, then the barrier of entry to WinJS might be the same as the barrier of entry to C#. So for that, it might actually be worse coming over to C# because there's a second thing to consider, around XAML and C#, and that's the fact that you have maintainability and some scalability that might be important. It kind of goes back to yesterday's discussion of if it's a very simple little app that you're just knocking out, technology may not even matter at all. But if it's a long-term line of business app, if it's an app that may be very successful soon, not only should you match your development team, but you might also match your development team's future skills as well. If it were me, obviously I would pick C# and XAML. If it's you, you might pick HTML5. You would need to convince me that that's a good idea, though. You got one going on?
We've got about 5 questions queued up right now. So here's the first one from Stephen. Can you expand a bit on when to opt for creating a Windows runtime component? What are the advantages and disadvantages? And did he understand correctly that you can't use it to create controls?
Got it. You did not understand correctly, although I can hear myself saying something that sounded like that.
Yes.
When would you use is when you need to project into another language.
Yeah, when there's a better solution for your problem at hand in another language, that's when I would choose to use it.
Mm-hmm. That's right. There we go. Let's see.
What are the advantages and disadvantages of further expansion?
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, you're choosing to use a specific language because it's better suited for the problem at hand. And so, there is no concrete answer to turn around and say, well, it's always advantageous to use C++ to do X. It really comes down to the domain and the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah. Somebody else was asking about where the source code can be found for yesterday's event, an excellent event that 2 really great guys put on.
Yeah.
That event, the source code will be right next to the source code for this one at xaml.codeplex.com. You can go there to download it later. We didn't have time last night to put it up because we were sort of preparing for today.
Absolutely. So another question. What are the top 3 third-party MVVM libraries and why?
What's the number 1?
I like MVVM Lite.
I like MVVM Lite as well. I would say if we were going to go down the line for 3, the next one perhaps is Charmed, maybe Calibre.
Yeah, Calibre.
Right there.
Yeah.
And then I would say has to be in that list is Prism.
Yes.
Because Prism is it's made by Patterns and Practices here at Microsoft, and it's the one that solves every problem.
It is. It's
not
designed really for enterprise development, I would say, more than sort of casual sort of commerce style applications and so on.
Like MVVM Lite is.
Exactly. And it's very conducive for large team development. So if you've got a very modular application, then Prism makes a lot of sense.
What tool would you use another question, what tool would you use to measure GPU consumption by a XAML app? What I use, I would use the diagnostics tool that's built into Visual Studio. In fact, let me just go ahead and show you where those are. Here's my Visual Studio app right here. I would go up to Analyze, and I would go to Performance and Diagnostics. And from there, I can run my application inside a monitored state that will measure, right here, CPU sampling. It's all built in and ready to go.
This one's specific to GPU, not CPU.
Oh, CPU.
GPU. GPU, yes.
Oh, now I don't know the answer.
Indeed.
Isn't that
Moving
funny?
swiftly on.
What the bung? Sorry, I read that too fast.
Okay, what would be a good practice to implement several read functions while scripting WAMs for Windows Phone? For Windows Phone, this is a Windows 8.
What are you doing?
Yes.
But let's just do it
Indeed.
anyway. Well, good practice for implementing several at a time. Is that what he means?
Yeah.
Several read functions at one time.
I currently create empty tables with MS SQL functions to access data in the real tables. Not entirely clear exactly what that is, so we'll move on.
I was totally going somewhere else. Can you build a full system with Windows Store apps? Can you build a full system with Windows Store apps? For example, a warehouse management system?
You could.
Yep, that's the quick no. You could make it happen. That is not really what this is for.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to put one of those full enterprise management systems out into the App Store. You might be thinking, well, maybe I could do sideways load for my enterprise and so on. The reality is, why?
Yeah.
If you're
WPF is so powerful. The .NET framework is so rich. What are you trying to accomplish by putting it here? You want it full screen? Just make an application that's full screen. You want it touch enabled? Just use multi-touch.
Now, there is a side response to this, which is you may well build an enterprise system in WPF or the web or whatever, but you may be sort of thinking about how can I leverage these mobile devices to participate in that, almost to have a companion application and so on and so forth. In that scenario, a store app sideways loaded onto a slate or something on the Windows Phone is an excellent idea.
Let me reiterate what you just said to make sure they got it. You can have a line of business app written in .NET or WPF or something, and then a companion app that sits. It's a smaller version of your app that allows you to access smaller pieces of the workflow, not the entire app. In fact, let me ask you a follow-up question. I just spent $3 million building my line of business app.
You did? You made a money, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. It's a WPF application, uses WCF services, has BI. So should I rewrite the entire thing as a store app?
No.
No, absolutely not. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. I've been asked that question a million times. And the reality is, you just spent $3 million on your app. You're done. Go for it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I mean, if you look at the capabilities of WPF, and then you look at the capabilities of a store application, the store application is meant to give a user a wonderful experience on a mobile device. It is not meant to replace the capabilities of what you can do on the desktop.
So we've got another question here. Can XAML C# be used to create apps for Windows 8.1 non-Intel devices? Is there a switch you need to set in building and compiling?
Excellent question. The answer is yes,
Yes,
you
it
can.
can.
Is there a switch? No, there is not.
Now you can change and target as part of your compilation target to target ARM.
You might need to do that if you include external libraries that may need to be built separately.
Yep.
But so then you would have to do the switch. You can do that when you do right-click, store, and create package. That's when you select that. But just out of the box, you automatically support both ARM and Intel. Beautiful. As long as you're not using external libraries. External libraries is where you have to start thinking about it. Doesn't mean you can't still. Just means you can't just do it without thinking.
Here's another question from Stephen, which is a scenario that we actually hit when we were building the NVA Scratch app, which is when using the hub control, can I create, maintain sections using a binding to observable collection? I guess I can always use the code behind.
You could use the code behind, you could use the binding, and both would be wrong. How about that?
Indeed.
The hub control is not meant to be a repeater. The hub control is meant to be a layout control. If what you're trying to create is an unmanaged repetition of data, put it all inside a single hub section. If you're trying to repeat the sections with an items source sort of approach, you're just doing it the wrong way. The hub control is meant to be a curated set of data or a container for a grouped grid view. It's not meant to replace the grid view and do it that way. So for one, you're hitting your head against the wall when you don't need to. For two, you're using the control in a way it's really not intended to be used.
So, I mean, your answer could be then that you would use a hub control, you'd have a single hub section within it, and you'd put a grid view in there that was bound to your observable collection.
That's right. There's no problem with that, right?
Exactly.
Because then you're still using it to do your general layout. You're not trying to misuse the hub sections.
Yep. Now, there are many clever ways that you could employ to do so.
Oh, right. Nobody is saying you can't do it.
Exactly.
We're saying you shouldn't.
Yeah. Which tool do you recommend, like options to XAML Spy and Snoop?
I recommend XAML Spy.
Can we use XAML Spy with our Windows Store apps?
You can, and yeah, then that's all. You can.
Moving swiftly on.
Wouldn't it be cool if Microsoft made one?
Yeah, it would be incredible if they did.
It would be incredible.
Question, is it possible to create a C++ component that accesses get system power status and then make that component available to C# Windows Store app? So I'm assuming get system power status is a Win32 API. Now, we're actually not prevented from interacting with Win32 APIs.
No, we're not.
Even in C#. We can do pinvoke.
Right.
So if there's an API that you want to call via pinvoke, then you can probably get it and bring it in. I can't answer expressly whether we can actually get system power status and so on, or whether that's privileged or whatever. I have no direct answer there. But I think you certainly should be able to, is my understanding.
Yeah, this would go back to a previous question, too, about ARM. If you do a Win32 call, that would probably invalidate your ARM compatibility.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very true.
Can I code for upload to shared drive folders? For example, Windows 8 user shares. I got to read this to myself for a second. SkyDrive folders with somebody else using Windows Phone. Windows Phone users upload mini videos. Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. We just showed the scenario.
Let's kind of summarize the question.
Yeah.
Can my phone app and my Windows app both talk to each other through SkyDrive.
Indeed.
Kind of what he's saying.
So we just showed in the session the download scenario. The upload scenario is absolutely supported. And because obviously somebody's SkyDrive is common, then you can traverse the same SkyDrive hierarchy to go and find those files and interact between them. Yes, absolutely you can.
Perfect. The benefit is getting offline reverse geocode rather than connecting to Bing Maps.
I don't think that's a question.
Well, it looks like it's in the context of the organizations considering a sat-nav product that comes with NRT.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about it from phone, and let's talk about it from Windows, and then just say something about it. Windows Phone has reverse geocoding offline reverse geocoding built in. Now, that doesn't mean it'll always work, and the reason is you may not have sufficient cache information, but it does mean you don't have to use Bing Maps anymore in order to do reverse geocoding. That same API doesn't exist exactly in Windows yet, but there is this convergence that will bring it together so that you don't have to feel this disconnect. So I understand what you're asking, and, well, I understand what you're asking. You just have to go with that. Where are you reading all these questions from? Right there.
The same list where you just asked that question. So JP Arellano, I'm guessing, that's where we're getting the questions from.
Debugging WCF services. People answer their own questions. It's the weirdest thing.
Okay, I'm guessing that we're running to the end of that stream of questions.
Yeah.
And we're 6 minutes over.
Yes, we are.
So let's call it time.
Okay. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this. This is all 7 modules of the advanced course. Yesterday was the essentials course. All of this will be available in an offline recording at your on demand in about 2 weeks. In addition, all of our slides will be available. In addition, all of our source code will be available. If you want the source code, probably a couple days from now, you can look at xaml.codeplex.com and get that for yourself. It's all going to be sitting there waiting for you. Darren, thanks for doing these 2 days with me.
Thanks, Jerry.
Yeah, thanks for being enthusiastic. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.